Let's be direct, my dear. We see you for what you are. You're a gold digger, and we will not stand by and watch you ruin our son's life. After 8 months of being deeply in love with Preston, this was Maya's welcome. His brother Spencer smirked smugly, while Preston himself stood frozen, utterly weak. But Maya didn't cry. She just stared right back at them, her silence a defiant challenge. They thought they had already won, but they had no idea their biggest mistake wasn't making the accusation, but accusing the wrong woman. Have you ever been in a position where the person who was supposed to be your greatest defender became your silent witness? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to see the moment they realize just who they're dealing with. The soft glow of the city lights blurred past the car window, but Maya Thompson saw none of it. Her focus was on the subtle tension in Preston's jaw, the way his knuckles were just a little too white on the steering wheel. He glanced at the simple, elegant black dress she wore, a sheath of dark silk that fell just below her knees. It was beautiful, understated, and distinctly her. It was also, she knew, not from a designer whose name was whispered with reverence in his world. "Are you sure, Maya?" he asked, his voice a low hum of anxiety. "It's beautiful, really. It's just, my mother, she's a bit—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the complex web of expectation and judgment that was Eleanor Hale. Maya reached over and placed a calming hand on his arm, her touch a silent reassurance. "It's me, Preston," she said softly. "That's what matters." He managed a weak smile, but the apprehension in his eyes remained, a quiet storm cloud on the horizon of their evening. The Hale Manor was not a home. It was a statement. It rose from the manicured grounds not as a place of warmth and shelter, but as a monument to wealth, a fortress of legacy. As they stepped from the car, the cold night air seemed to carry the weight of the massive stone facade. Inside the foyer was a cavern of polished marble and cold, shimmering light from a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen tears. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the vast space, swallowed by ceilings that soared into shadows. It felt less like an entry hall and more like the lobby of a grand, impersonal museum where the exhibits were the people themselves. Immediately, Maya felt the shift. The air, thick with expensive perfume and the low murmur of conversation, was charged with a current of appraisal. Dozens of eyes, practiced and sharp, flickered over her, cataloging, assessing, and dismissing in a single, sweeping glance. A young woman with Preston's dark hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes detached herself from a nearby group. "Preston, there you are." She turned to Maya, offering a hand that felt cool and limp in her own. "You must be Maya. I'm Aubrey." Her eyes did a quick professional scan, starting at Maya's simple pearl earrings and traveling down, pausing for a fraction of a second too long on the unbranded silhouette of her dress. "It's so lovely to finally meet you. Your dress. It's so minimalist." The word hung in the air, a perfectly crafted insult disguised as a compliment. Before Maya could formulate a response, a broader, more confident presence shouldered his way in. Spencer Hale wore his arrogance like a well-tailored suit. He clapped Preston on the back, his grin wide and predatory. "Finally brought her into the lion's den, little brother." His gaze fell upon Maya, sharp and amused. "So," he said, his voice laced with a playful condescension, "what is it you do?" Maya straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "I manage a non-profit fund for community arts programs." Spencer's smirk widened. "Right, charity work. That's noble." He leaned in slightly, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I mean, does it have potential?" The question was a clear insinuation, a test of her financial standing disguised as career curiosity. Preston stiffened beside her. "Spencer, stop it." But the damage was done, another small cut in the armor of her confidence. Just then, the crowd seemed to part, and Eleanor Hale glided towards them. She was a vision of controlled elegance, her smile a masterpiece of social grace. "Preston, darling." She kissed his cheek before turning her perfectly composed face to Maya. Her eyes, a cool, intelligent blue, held a disarming warmth that felt utterly manufactured. And this must be Maya. It is a pleasure. She took Maya's hand in both of her own, her touch surprisingly firm. My son has told me so much about you. You're so authentic. Such a breath of fresh air in this tiresome world. Every word was a perfectly polished stone, smooth on the surface but heavy with unspoken meaning. Authentic, minimalist, potential. They were code words, polite ways of saying you don't belong. Preston was soon pulled away by a business associate, leaving Maya adrift in a sea of champagne flutes and critical stares. She stood alone near a marble column, nursing a glass of water, trying to appear serene. It was then that she heard it, a fragment of conversation from two women nearby, their voices not quite low enough. She's pretty, I suppose, in an ordinary way. The other woman scoffed lightly. Preston has always had a soft spot for a project. Still to bring her here? She's got some nerve. The words struck Maya with the force of a physical blow. Nerve, as if her presence was an act of aggression, an intrusion. The quiet hurt that had been simmering all evening began to crystallize into a cold, heavy ache in her chest. She wasn't Preston's girlfriend here. She was an exhibit, an anomaly, an invader. When Preston returned, beaming, to ask if she was having a good time, she met his gaze and offered a smile that was a perfect, hollow thing. She realized then that the evening was not a celebration, but an appraisal, and she had already been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The last of the guests were departing, their laughter and polite goodbyes echoing in the marble foyer as a valet brought their cars around. The grand performance was over. Preston squeezed Maya's hand, a silent apology for the gauntlet she had just endured. I'm so sorry about Spencer, he whispered, his relief at the evening's end palpable. He's just... Before he could finish the excuse, Eleanor Hale glided back into the hall, her smile as fixed and brilliant as the diamonds at her throat. Preston, darling, Maya, she said, her voice a melody of warmth that Maya now recognized as a warning bell. Before you leave, would you join us in the study for a moment? Just for a quiet chat, now that the chaos has died down. Preston's face brightened, mistaking the summons for a sign of acceptance. Of course, Mother. But Maya felt a chill snake down her spine. This was not an olive branch. This was a closing of the doors, a drawing of the curtains before the real proceedings began. The study was everything the main hall was not, dark, heavy, and suffocating. Where the gala had been a performance of airy opulence, this room was the backstage reality of power. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that looked as though they had never been opened, serving as wallpaper rather than literature. The air smelled of old wood, brandy, and an unspoken authority. Spencer was already there, lounging in a deep leather armchair with a smirk that suggested he was anticipating a spectator sport. Aubrey was perched on the edge of another chair, looking nervous but complicit. And in the corner, shrouded in shadow, sat a man Maya hadn't met. He was older, with a stillness that commanded more attention than Spencer's bluster. He watched them enter with the cool, calculating eyes of a man assessing risk, his fingers steepled under his chin. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, the sound unnervingly final. This was not a study, it was a tribunal. Eleanor gestured for them to sit on a stiff-backed sofa that faced the assembled family like a witness stand. Maya, dear, she began, her tone dripping with feigned concern. We just want what's best for Preston. You understand that, don't you? She didn't wait for an answer. Her eyes, which had feigned warmth all evening, were now cold and sharp. Let me be direct, as I find it saves time. Where did you two meet? Was it on one of those apps? The kind designed for young women seeking stability? The insinuation was vile, a silken thread of poison woven into the question. Preston started to protest. Mother, that's completely out of line. We met at a gallery. Spencer let out a short, barking laugh. Oh, spare us, Preston. Just tell us what you're after, he said, his gaze fixed on Maya. Come on, Mother. Let's just say what we're all thinking. You're a gold digger, aren't you? It's written all over you. Spencer, shut up! Preston roared, jumping to his feet, but his anger was a firecracker against a fortress wall. Loud, brief, and utterly ineffective. The man in the corner finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that cut through the tension with chilling precision. Preston, sit down. Your emotions are irrelevant here. Preston froze, turning to the man with a look of shocked deference. Uncle Conrad? The man, Conrad Hale, leaned forward into the light, his face a mask of cold pragmatism. He ignored Preston and addressed the room as if he were closing a deal. This isn't about feelings, he stated, his eyes locking onto Maya with unnerving intensity. It's about business. The Hale family is a corporation, and our legacy is our primary asset. And this girl, he concluded with a dismissive wave of his hand, by every metric is a bad investment. The words hung in the oppressive air, colder and sharper than any insult Spencer could conjure. A bad investment. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Maya felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, the familiar burn of humiliation. But then, something else rose to meet it. A cold, quiet anger. They had stripped away every layer of her being, her work, her personality, her love for their son, and reduced her to a line item on a balance sheet. The hurt didn't vanish, but it was forged into something harder, something resilient. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply held Conrad's gaze, then Spencer's, then Eleanor's. She raised a single, delicate eyebrow. The silence that followed was more powerful than any denial. Her refusal to break, to perform the role of the scorned, hysterical woman they expected, infuriated them. It was a quiet, profound act of defiance. Eleanor, flustered by this unexpected composure, pressed on. Well, don't you have anything to say for yourself? Maya looked at the man she loved, at Preston, whose face was a portrait of helpless agony, trapped between the woman he loved and the family that owned him. Then she looked back at his mother. She did not say a word. She had finally understood. They were not questioning her intentions. They had already passed their sentence. The verdict was delivered with the cold finality of a judge's gavel. We will not, under any circumstances, approve of this union, Eleanor declared, her voice devoid of the false warmth it had carried earlier. We simply cannot allow Preston to be dragged down. The words were meant to crush, to be the final, decisive blow in their campaign of humiliation. She, along with Spencer and Conrad, watched Maya, expecting tears, a desperate plea, or perhaps a flash of vulgar anger. They were prepared for a scene. They were not prepared for the slow, quiet smile that spread across Maya's face. It was not a smile of mirth or triumph, but of profound, liberating clarity. The weight of trying, of hoping, of pretending she could ever earn their approval, lifted from her shoulders in that single, silent moment. The game was over, and the realization that she no longer had to play was its own form of victory. She rose from the sofa with a newfound grace, her movements fluid and unhurried. Preston, who had been staring at the floor in wretched silence, looked up, his face a mask of confusion and despair. Maya, don't, he started, his voice cracking. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort rather than accusation. It's all right, Preston. I'm okay. She turned away from him and reached into her small clutch, retrieving her phone. The simple, modern gesture seemed jarringly out of place in the archaic, wood-paneled study. Spencer let out a snort of derision, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. What are you going to do now? Call a ride? What is it, an Uber pool? Let me spot you some change. He made a show of reaching for his wallet, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Eleanor watched with an expression of weary pity, as if Maya's attempt to maintain her dignity was a pathetic, childish display. My dear, you don't have to pretend to be strong, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. We understand this must be very difficult for you. Maya ignored them all. Her fingers moved deftly across the screen, selecting a single contact from her favorites. She lifted the phone to her ear, her back straight, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the suffocating walls of the room. The call connected on the first ring. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice calm and even, a pool of tranquility in the turbulent room. I'm finished here. Could you have someone come pick me up at the Hale residence? There was a brief pause. Yes, that's the one, thank you. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. The entire exchange had taken less than 20 seconds. The Hales stared, momentarily speechless. The sheer, unadorned simplicity of her action had disarmed them. They had expected a dramatic exit, not quiet, efficient logistics. The silence that followed stretched into a minute, then two. It was thick with unspoken tension. Spencer began to pace, his amusement curdling into impatience. Preston looked helplessly from Maya to his mother, a man caught in a crossfire of his own making. Only Conrad remained perfectly still, his eyes narrowed, his mind clearly working, analyzing this unexpected variable. The first sign was a subtle crunch of tires on the gravel of the long, winding driveway, a sound too heavy and synchronized for a single taxi. A moment later, the estate's head of staff appeared at the study door, his face pale and flustered. "Mrs. Hale," he stammered, "there are vehicles at the gate. They're asking for a Miss Maya Thompson." Before Eleanor could respond, the low, powerful thrum of multiple engines grew louder, coming to a halt directly in front of the manor. Through the tall study windows, they could see the sleek, black silhouettes of three identical SUVs, their tinted windows reflecting the cold moonlight like obsidian mirrors. They were not ostentatious, but their quiet, formidable presence spoke a language of power far more potent than the Hales' generational wealth. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged from the lead vehicle and moved toward the entrance with an air of disciplined professionalism. As they stepped into the light of the foyer, a small, discreet logo on the lapel of their jackets became visible. It was a stylized T intertwined with a subtle lightning bolt. Conrad Hale, who had risen from his chair for a better view, froze. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly ashen pallor. "No," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "It can't be." Eleanor turned to him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Conrad, what is it? What's wrong?" He looked at his sister-in-law, and for the first time since Maya had met him, his mask of calculating control had shattered, revealing a raw, primal fear. "That's not a security company, Eleanor," he breathed, his voice tight with dawning horror. "That's Thompson's personal crest. That's Victor Thompson's private detail." As if summoned by his name, the great oak doors of the manor swung open. A man stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the house shifted, the center of gravity reorienting around him. He was not large or physically imposing, but he moved with an unshakable confidence that made the cavernous hall seem small. He was dressed in a simple dark suit that was a masterpiece of understated tailoring. He didn't look at the stunned staff or at the Hales who were now clustered in the doorway of the study like frightened statues. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the hall for only a moment before they found her. He walked directly toward Maya, his expression softening from one of neutral authority to one of deep, paternal concern. He stopped a few feet from her, his presence a shield against the venomous atmosphere of the room. He ignored everyone else as if they were nothing more than decorative furniture. He looked at his daughter, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, gentle, and carried more weight than all the Hale fortunes combined. "Maya," he said, "are you okay?" Victor Thompson's question, simple and direct, hung in the air, displacing all the oxygen in the room. Maya gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent answer that conveyed everything. "I'm okay, Dad." The words were quiet, but for the Hales they were a cataclysm. The name, the face, the private security detail. The disparate, impossible pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Spencer's sneering confidence evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, slack-jawed disbelief. Aubrey shrank back, her face flushing with a deep, mortified crimson as every condescending glance she'd given Maya replayed in her mind. Eleanor's hand flew to the diamonds at her throat, a reflexive gesture of a woman whose entire world, built on a foundation of unshakable social hierarchy, had just been fractured beyond repair. Preston remained frozen, a statue of pure shame, unable to meet Maya's eyes or his father's. And Conrad, the pragmatist, the man who saw the world as a series of calculated risks, looked at Victor Thompson not as a father, but as a market force, a living embodiment of a catastrophic miscalculation. Victor's gaze finally left his daughter, sweeping over the assembled family with a look of profound and weary disappointment. There was no anger in his eyes, which somehow made it worse. It was the detached sorrow of a man observing a deep and unfixable character flaw. He stepped further into the study, his calm presence commanding the space, reducing the opulent room to a mere backdrop for the quiet judgment he was about to render. I've spent Maya's entire life teaching her a single, fundamental lesson, he began, his voice even and measured, each word landing with deliberate weight. That a person's net worth is a number, but their worth as a human being is measured in their integrity, their compassion, and how they treat people who they believe can do nothing for them. My legacy doesn't define my daughter. Her character does. He paused, letting the silence amplify the indictment. But it seems you use a different metric in this house. He looked directly at Eleanor, then at Conrad. For the past hour, you have put my daughter on trial. You have interrogated her, insulted her, and passed judgment upon her based on nothing more than the simplicity of her dress and the humility of her spirit. You saw kindness and assumed it was a weakness. You saw grace and assumed it was an act. He took another step forward. You called her a bad investment. You accused her of digging for gold. I feel it is only fair that I clarify the specifics of the mine. He let the metaphor hang in the air for a beat. Maya is my only child. She is the sole heir to everything I have built. He delivered the information not as a boast, but as a tedious point of fact, a piece of data he was now forced to introduce into their flawed equation. Spencer made a small, strangled sound, a mix of awe and terror, but Victor raised a hand, dismissing the revelation as if it were a minor detail. But that fact, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense, is irrelevant to me right now. It is a distraction from the real issue. His gaze hardened, and he fixed it upon Conrad, man to man, power to power. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Hale, a hypothetical. Suppose my daughter had nothing. Suppose she was exactly who you thought she was tonight. A kind, intelligent young woman from a modest background who works for a nonprofit. Suppose her only asset was the love she has for your nephew. How would you have treated her then? He leaned forward ever so slightly. That is what matters. The question was a moral thunderclap that struck the very foundation of their world. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror, and the reflection it showed them was ugly and impoverished in a way money could never fix. Conrad, for the first time in his professional life, was speechless. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was he who finally broke the silence, his voice raspy and strained. Mr. Thompson, Victor, this is a truly terrible misunderstanding. Victor's expression remained unchanged, his calm implacable. A misunderstanding doesn't make people cruel, Mr. Hale, he responded, his voice cutting like glass. It only reveals what was already there. He straightened up, his tone shifting from philosophical to coldly professional. As for the long-term partnership between our firms, we will be reevaluating. The word hung in the air, a quiet, devastating threat, far more terrifying than any outburst of anger. It promised not a quick death, but a slow, uncertain bleeding of the prestige and power the Hales held so dear. Victor placed a gentle hand on Maya's back, ready to guide her out of the toxic atmosphere. They had turned to leave when Maya stopped. She looked back one last time, not at Preston, but at the family that had tried to break her. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was now overlaid with a powerful, clarifying strength. She had found her voice. The problem was never how much money I might have, she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating in the silent ruin of the room. The problem is that you think you have the right to put a price on a person at all. With that, she turned and walked away with her father, leaving the Hale family standing alone in the wreckage of their own creation, choking on the ashes of their arrogance. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, muffling the suffocating silence of the Hale study and replacing it with the vast, cold stillness of the night. Maya walked beside her father across the cavernous marble foyer, each step echoing in the sudden emptiness. A strange, hollow calm had settled over her, the kind that follows a brutal storm. The adrenaline that had sharpened her senses during the interrogation had faded, leaving behind the deep, tender ache of the initial wound. She was aware of her father's solid presence beside her, a silent anchor in the swirling currents of her emotions. He didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes or promises of retribution. He simply walked with her, his proximity a testament to an unspoken, unconditional support that she had, until this moment, always taken for granted. As they approached the entrance where the lead SUV waited, its engine a low, patient hum, Victor gave her a slight, understanding nod and took a few steps ahead toward the open passenger door, creating an unspoken bubble of space around her, a final moment of privacy on enemy ground. He knew this last act was not his to fight. It was in that space that she heard him, the frantic, desperate sound of leather shoes stumbling on polished stone. "Maya, wait!" Preston's voice was raw, a shredded version of its usual smooth cadence. He came to a skidding halt a few feet away from her, his chest heaving, his face a shattered mosaic of panic and shame. The carefully constructed facade of the handsome Hale heir had crumbled, revealing the terrified man beneath. "Please," he gasped, his eyes wide and pleading. "Don't go. Don't leave like this. I love you." The words which had once been the bedrock of her world now seemed to float on the surface of a much deeper, more treacherous reality. She turned to face him fully, her own expression calm, almost clinical. The tempest of hurt was still raging inside her, but on the surface, she was ice. She had to be. "I don't doubt that you love me, Preston," she said, her voice even and devoid of accusation. It was a statement of fact, not of forgiveness. "I never have." She let that truth settle between them before delivering the one that truly mattered. "What I doubt is your courage." He flinched as if she had struck him, the truth of her words hitting him with more force than any insult his family had thrown at her. He opened his mouth to protest, to offer the excuses and rationalizations that had likely served him his entire life. But she held up a hand, stopping him. "No, let's not do that. Let's, for one moment, be completely honest." She took a breath, gathering the scattered pieces of her resolve. "I need you to answer me, not as the man whose family is waiting in that room, or as the man who just discovered who my father is. I need the answer from you. The man I fell in love with." She held his gaze, her own unwavering, forcing him to see the abyss that had opened between them. "Tonight, in that study, when they were tearing me apart, if I was just Maya, just a girl you met at a gallery, a woman who runs a small nonprofit, with no powerful name, no connections, no hidden fortune, would you have had the strength to take my hand and walk out of that door with me, against all of them?" The question was a scalpel, laid bare the diseased heart of their problem. It wasn't about her father, or the money, or the power. It was about him, about his character, his spine. He stared at her, and in the agonizing silence that followed, she had her answer. His jaw worked, his throat bobbing as he struggled to find words that didn't exist. The conflict in his eyes was a terrible thing to witness. The man he wanted to be at war with the man he was. Finally, his shoulders slumped in a gesture of utter and complete defeat. A choke sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped his lips. "I don't know," he whispered, the admission costing him everything. His eyes glistened with unshed tears of self-loathing. "Oh God, I don't know. And that makes me a coward, doesn't it?" His confession was a raw, bleeding thing, and for the first time Maya felt a flicker of something other than pain. A sliver of pity, of shared sorrow for the man he had failed to be. She reached out, not to touch him, but as if to steady the air between them. "You're not a coward, Preston," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You were scared. There's a difference." He looked up, confused. "A coward is someone who can't change," she explained, her voice gaining a new, quiet strength. "A scared person is someone who just hasn't learned how to be brave yet." She saw the flicker of hope in his eyes and knew she had to be clear. This was not absolution. "I love you," she said, echoing his own words back to him. but I cannot be with a man who is afraid of his own family's shadow. Not because I'm my father's daughter, but because I am my own person, and I deserve a partner, not someone I have to rescue from his own gilded cage. She let the weight of her declaration settle, a final, non-negotiable term. I need time, she said, and you need to change. Not for me, for you. Go and become the man who would have walked out of that room with me tonight, the man who wouldn't have had to hesitate. He nodded, tears now streaming freely down his face, accepting his sentence with a broken but willing heart. She turned without another word and walked to the waiting car, leaving him alone in the cold, cavernous hall to find his own way out of the ruins. The 3 weeks that followed the confrontation at the Hale Manor were a study in silence. For Maya, it was a necessary quiet, a space to let the bruised parts of her soul heal. She threw herself into her work at the foundation, finding solace in the tangible good of providing grants to struggling artists in community centers. She spent evenings in her apartment, a space that felt more her own than ever, filled with books and the scent of brewing tea, a sanctuary from a world that had tried to label and appraise her. The silence from the Hales was absolute, a void she was grateful for. The silence from Preston was different. It wasn't an absence. It was a presence, a carefully maintained distance that spoke of a burgeoning respect she hadn't known he was capable of. There were no desperate calls, no pleading texts, no grand, empty gestures. There was only an email, which arrived in her inbox every Friday morning, as reliable as the sunrise. They were not love letters, and they did not ask for forgiveness. They were quiet, honest dispatches from his own internal reconstruction, detailing his decision to move into a small apartment downtown, the challenges of managing a minor project at the firm without his family's influence, and the uncomfortable but clarifying conversations he was having in therapy. He wrote not of his love for her, but of his journey to become a man worthy of it, and in doing so made a more compelling case for himself than any bouquet of roses ever could. The first crack in the Hale's silence came not as a bang, but as the whisper of heavy cardstock. A handwritten letter from Eleanor arrived via courier. The penmanship was elegant, the script of a woman practiced in the art of social correspondence, but Maya noticed a slight tremor in the loops of the letters. It was a formal, stilted apology, devoid of emotional warmth, but filled with a clear and profound regret for her unconscionable behavior and grievous error in judgment. It was the letter of a CEO acknowledging a catastrophic business mistake, and Maya accepted it as such, a necessary, if impersonal, step in damage control. She read it, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. She did not reply. Spencer's apology came a week later and was, in its own way, far more meaningful. He called her office and asked awkwardly if he could have 5 minutes of her time. They met in the neutral territory of a coffee shop lobby, and he couldn't have looked more uncomfortable. He fumbled with his ridiculously expensive watch, avoiding her eyes. "Look, Thompson." "No, Maya," he started, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "There's no excuse. I was an ass, a complete, arrogant ass." He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she didn't see a predator, but a man deeply humbled and lost. "My entire life has been about status. Who has more? Who is more? When I saw you with Preston, so unimpressed by it all, it felt like a threat. It made me feel insecure." He let out a harsh, self-deprecating laugh. "Pathetic, I know, but it's the truth, and I am truly sorry for what I said and how I treated you." Maya listened, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for the apology, Spencer," she said, her voice polite but cool. "I appreciate the honesty." She accepted his atonement, but offered no absolution. The boundary was drawn, clear and firm. On a rainy Tuesday, nearly a month after that night, Maya was huddled in her favorite corner booth at a small independent coffee shop downtown, lost in a novel. The bell above the door chimed, but she didn't look up, absorbed in the world of her book. She didn't notice him until a familiar warmth and the scent of fresh coffee permeated her personal space. She looked up, and there he was. Preston. He looked different. The entitled ease was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve in his eyes. He wasn't smiling in his old charming way. His expression was open, vulnerable, and profoundly respectful. In his hand, he held a single ceramic mug. He placed it carefully on her table, next to her book. It was a latte with oat milk and a light dusting of cinnamon. Her exact order. He didn't sit down. He didn't crowd her space. He simply stood there, his hands now empty at his sides. "No pressure," he said, his voice low and steady. "No demands." He took a small, almost imperceptible step back, giving her room to breathe, to think, to exist without his influence. "I just wanted you to know that I'm still trying. I'm here when you're ready." He had ceded all power, all control, all expectation to her. It was the single most courageous thing she had ever seen him do. For a long moment, Maya just looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the hale heir, but the man fighting his way out of the shadow of his name. She saw the fear he had confessed to, now replaced with a quiet strength. He was becoming the man who would have walked out of that room with her. A slow, genuine smile, the first one she had felt in weeks, touched her lips. She closed her book, marking her place, and reached her hand across the table, palm up, an invitation, an offering. He took it, his hand warm and steady in hers. "Hello, Preston," she said, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "Shall we start again?" And so our story comes to a close, reminding us that true value is measured not by what we have, but by who we are, especially when no one is watching. What did you think of Maya's quiet strength and Preston's journey toward courage? Do you believe that people, when truly confronted with their own flaws, are capable of genuine change? We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and for following this story to its very end. Until we meet again for the next one, take care.